Year 11s, here is your transport systems revision video. So what we're going to cover is everything you need in preparation for the assessment that's coming up, and we're going to start off by thinking about why do you need transport systems in animals and plants, which is a good place to start. I'll then look at plants quickly and get them out of the way because they're a bit boring compared to the animals. Okay, there's not a lot going on there, but there are still some important things you need to know. But then of course we're going to look at animals, and in particular you'll be looking at a mammalian or a human heart. So we're going to be looking at the structure of the heart, adaptations that help it do its job, and we'll also be looking at the blood. Now there are certain adaptations there that you need to know about, namely something to do with the circulatory system. So we'll be linking all of that together in one way or another. And then finally we're going to start thinking about this blood issue, and we're going to go to talk about the idea of donors, and we might be going to think about the issue of artificial blood and other artificial organs that you might be able to have. Okay, so that's the sort of plan for this. It's probably going to take, I reckon I might just get it under 10 minutes, might be a bit longer than that. We shall see. Right, here we go. Here's a cell. This is magnified many, many times. Obviously, your cells will be much, much smaller than that. And life's easy when you're a cell. It's really very, very simple. You float around in your environment and stuff diffuses in and stuff diffuses out. If there's lots of stuff outside and not much inside, it will diffuse in. If there's lots of stuff inside, actually let's change colour. If there's lots of stuff inside and not much out, it will diffuse out. And this is really good. Diffusion means that life for single-celled organisms could not be easier. All they have to do is sit there, and the stuff they need to survive, like oxygen and glucose, that floats in. The stuff that they want to get rid of, like the carbon dioxide and maybe the wastewater or maybe urea, that just diffuses out. And it's simple. Nobody has to worry about breathing or anything. Amoeba really have it sorted. But for the rest of us multicellular organisms, it gets a bit more complicated, and here is why. Okay, the more cells you have, the harder it becomes for that diffusion to take place. So if we make this a multicellular organism like this, and we start clustering them together, well, the minute you get beyond a very small organism with, I don't know, 9 cells or something like that, what you're going to start finding is that the cells in the middle, this one here, gets starved of oxygen and all the other supplies because the diffusion is only going to reach the outer cells. So if you want to get the needed nutrients for life into the middle, you're going to need some kind of pipe, some kind of transport system. This is true of animals and plants. We're both quite big organisms, and we need to get that important stuff, that oxygen, that glucose, that water, into those cells in the middle of the organism. In fact, we have to get it around the whole organism. So let's look at the boring one first. Okay. So we look at the plants. Here is a plant. Very generalised. Now you don't need to worry about this signals bit. Okay, that's just because of the image that I found. But what you do need to worry about is the two pathways that we're looking at here. We are looking at the xylem pathway going up the stem, and you'll notice that it is drawing water, including nutrients. So that'll be water with mineral ions, magnesium ions, those kinds of things. Get drawn through the root hair cells. That's these little structures down here. Nice big surface area to speed up osmosis. Notice what I'm doing there. I'm linking back to our previous topic. Remember I said links are important. There's one for you. But that water is going to be drawn in by a process of osmosis. And because we have these nice little xylem tubes, these xylem straws in a way, it forms a continuous column all the way up to the top of the plant. And when it gets to these points here, these are called the stomata. And stomata are tiny little holes in the leaves. All plants have them, and they allow the water to evaporate off into the air. Obviously, the speed of evaporation will be affected by a variety of things. The heat of the day, the wind speed, the humidity as well. The more humid it is, the slower the evaporation will take place. Okay, but that water escaping from these little holes here actually draws it up further from the ground. So you wouldn't get the water from here to here if it wasn't for this evaporation. So it is quite useful. We don't necessarily call it evaporation, it has a fancy word in plants. We call it transpiration. Of course, you don't want this happening blindly all the time. If it's a hot day and you're running out of the water down here, you want to slow down the rate at which it's getting out of those stomata. And there's a very easy mechanical way to do that. You just slam shut the guard cells on the stomata here. And because they get closed down, less water can escape out of them. And you're less likely to dehydrate the plant and kill it. So plants are very crafty in that way. Now the other pathway we've got, so that's xylem, done. The other one we're going to talk about is phloem. Notice arrows going up, arrows going down. Phloem tubes carry stuff in both directions. But the whole purpose of these leaves is to make sugar. Think of them as sugar factories. That sugar is used as the basis for respiration by all of the cells of the plant, no matter where they are. So the cells in the leaves respire the sugar, the cells in the stem respire the sugar, and the cells in the root respire the sugar. The ones in the roots possibly more so than any of the others because they have to do all of that active transport to get stuff in. So in order to make sure that those cells are well nourished and they can continue to do all of this stuff, you have to get the sugar spread around, and that's what phloem does. Phloem starts with the first sound, so does food. It's a very crude trick to remember it, but basically the phloem is distributing food to the cells of the plant. Okay, there we have it, plants. Let's talk about animals because they're better, but before we do, there's a little picture for you. This is a scanning electron micrograph of an aphid. Aphids live on the sugary contents of the phloem. This is what they get their food from. So he's got mouth parts that are specifically designed to drill into this plant, and they're very good at making sure they locate the phloem and not the xylem, because they want a meal, they want sugar, they don't want a drink, they don't just want to drink water. They locate the phloem, and that's what nourishes them. Okay, animals then. So we're going to talk a little bit about the heart to start with, because obviously the heart is very important. It's the basis of this whole circulatory system, and here is one. They don't look very much like that, as you are now aware, but it's a good generalised diagram. This has got arrows on it which show you the path of the blood through it. But a key thing to know is that even if you had a massive brain snap and you couldn't figure it out, and there were no arrows on it in the exam, it's actually blindingly obvious which way the blood goes. It's obviously going to go down there, because look at these things here. Okay, if the blood tried to flow back the other way, that's what I wanted to do. If the blood tried to flow back the other way there, this thing looks like a valve. It's not going to let it through. Okay, so you can figure it out by looking at it which way the blood is going to go. Right, now you might notice that we've got two halves here, one blue, one red, and I'd hope you remember that that's to do with the oxygenation of the blood. So this is deoxygenated. But this one over here is of course oxygenated, which means that the hemoglobin has got oxygen molecules. It's loaded with oxygen molecules. One hemoglobin molecule can hold 4 molecules of oxygen. And that's what makes it nice and red. This bit in the middle, you'll all remember, it's called the septum. Prevents mixing of those two. If that and that mix, you're in all kinds of trouble, because it means that the tissues of your body are not getting nice oxygenated blood. They're getting a mixture. They're getting some oxygenated blood, but some deoxygenated. And it means you're going to be struggling to get enough oxygen to your muscles and tissues. Right, here's how it works. Blood comes back from the in through the main vein, which is called the vena cava. And you'll see that it branches, because this bit comes from your legs, that bit comes from your head. But in flows the blood into this bit. Now when you go into a house, you go into the hall. That's where you take your shoes off. And the Latin for hall is atrium. So that means when the blood comes into the heart, it doesn't have to take its shoes off, but it goes into the hall, otherwise known as the atrium. This is of course the right atrium, because we're looking at this as if it were sitting in someone's chest cavity. It would be on the right of their body. So it's on the left hand side of the diagram, but it is the right atrium. In comes the blood, and at this stage it's going to be filling up this chamber here, but not going anywhere. We've got a valve down here called the atrioventricular valve, for those of you taking notes, because it goes from the atrium to the ventricle. When this ventricle has finished contracting and squeezing out the blood that was in it. It's obviously now kind of empty. We need to let in the next batch. So that's when the atrium contracts, in goes the blood, and this is now nice and full, this ventricle down here. Notice it's got quite chunky muscle down there, a bit more chunky than the atrium because it needs to do a big squish. Out comes the blood, and this is going to go off to the lungs. When it's in the lungs, it gets delivered there by the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary just means to do with the lungs. It gets oxygenated. We've talked a lot about how stuff gets oxygenated, but once again, we have a massive link to that favourite topic of ours, diffusion. Diffusion crops up again and again in B3. If you understand diffusion, everything else becomes a lot easier. But now the blood's going to come back from the lungs, and of course it's got to get back into one of the atria. So this is the pulmonary vein here, and notice again it's branched. I guess it's because you've got a right and left lung. So in goes the blood, fills up the atrium, and as before, the atrium contracts, squishes it down here into the left ventricle, and this is the really chunky bit of muscle. Look at the size of muscle there, because this has to pump it all the way around your whole body. Out it comes with a big squish and goes through the aorta. Oh yeah, there you go. And you can see branches there, so it goes off to the different parts of the body. It's a double circulatory system. It goes to the lungs, back to the heart, and then back out. Not all creatures have that, but mammals do. Hopefully, that's all kind of familiar, and we're familiar with the parts. This is an artificial heart. These things have actually been tried on a couple of people, not many, but 1 or 2 patients have managed to get these. And they said the weirdest thing about it is that you don't have a heartbeat, because this thing runs on motors that of course don't go dudum, they just whir away in your chest cavity. I believe the people who've had these, they usually have incredibly severe heart disease. They're basically a ticking time bomb, they haven't got long left. And they put one of these in as a last resort. You have to connect your blood vessels to these things here. These would be titanium metal rings that you can anchor the blood vessels to. It's not perfect, it carries an element of risk because that's not going to make a very good seal. But as a last resort, it ain't bad. So it is possible to make an artificial heart, and they're getting more sophisticated all of the time. But when it comes to the blood, we haven't yet managed to make artificial blood. The closest we've got is making molecules that look a bit like this. That's a ring of carbon atoms. And then all around the edge of it, you put fluorine atoms. They call these perfluorocarbons. We met them before when we were talking about artificial breathing aids and stuff like that, and we talked about breathing fluids. Well, this is a liquid, and what happens is the oxygen molecules that come in, is an oxygen molecule, obviously, they actually get caught in between the ring of carbons and fluorines, and it means that the liquid can hold on to oxygen and then give it up later on. It's a bit like an artificial form of hemoglobin. But the trouble is, as you well know, there's more to blood than just a component that hangs on to oxygen. So you do have one of those, and it's called hemoglobin. But there's loads of other stuff that we haven't yet learned to replicate. So we can make an artificial version of that, but what we can't do is make artificial platelets. We can't make artificial white blood cells. And to be honest, the plasma is quite important, and making an artificial plasma is probably a lot harder than you think. Plasma contains all kinds of chemicals, hormones, things like that carried around. You need it to be the right kind of liquid to carry all this. So that's why artificial hearts are something that exists, but artificial blood is not. We haven't yet found a way to copy, in particular, these things here. If you had that flowing through your veins, it'd all be great until you got an infection or you cut yourself. If you nicked your finger, paper cut on your finger, you'd be spilling this expensive fluid all over the floor with no hope of stopping it. So that's why that is there. So obviously, we can't make artificial blood. We need instead donors. Now, you guys might be old enough to donate blood. I don't know. I can't remember what the age is. I suspect it's probably 18. But there's always a big drive on to get more blood donors. There are 4 blood types, broadly speaking: A, B, AB, and O. And there are subtypes within that. You can either have A positive or negative. These are what we call the rhesus factors. So you could be like A positive or whatever. These letters and these things here, they refer to antigens on the surface of your blood cells. Here's a blood cell. Here are the little antigens on it. And it's quite possible that you have antigens on the surface of your blood cells that match antigens on the surface of somebody else's. So you could take blood out of you, put it in someone else, and their immune system wouldn't cotton on. You'd be able to get away with it. Which means if somebody has a horrific accident and loses a couple of pints of blood, well, you could help them out by giving them some of yours. So donors are really important. You can also do crazy stuff with donors, like you can actually just give them the platelets. I spelled that wrong. Platelets, there we go. Or sometimes you just give them the plasma. In extreme trauma cases where you want to keep the blood pressure up, giving them the plasma means that you can actually keep something flowing through their circulatory system and keeping the heart beating and keeping the blood pressure up. And platelets are quite useful, particularly for people who might have diseases where they have issues with the clotting of blood. You can keep platelets for quite a long time, transfuse them in and help those people out. So donors, really useful. Okay, let's just quickly go back to the very beginning, check that I've done what I said I would do. How do we make that thing go away, I wonder? Okay, so hopefully we've talked about why you need a circulatory system and why plants need it. We've dealt with the bits of the plant, we've talked about the heart and blood and the circulatory system. And I hope you realise why blood donors are important and why we haven't yet made artificial blood. That's basically what you're going to need. Good luck in the assessment.